Hello, thank you so much for tuning in this afternoon for Lachlan Hinwood's Artist Talk. My name is Lillian Day Thorpe, and I'm the director of Nancy Margolis Gallery. Today, Lachlan Hinwood is going to chat with Brooklyn-based artist Ben Cowan about the paintings in his first solo exhibition with NMG, Life Happens Everywhere, which is on view through March 1st. Before diving in, I want to share a few words about both speakers. Born in Manitoba, Canada, Lachlan Hinwood received a BA in Geography and Art from Macalester College and an MFA in Painting and Drawing from the University of Iowa. His intimately sized paintings meditate on quietness, color, and a transcendental relationship to the landscape. Place is a central theme in Hinwood's practice, and his paintings often begin from observational sketches. Hinwood has been featured in solo and group exhibitions across the country, as well as abroad, including recent shows in London and Barcelona. Our moderator, Ben Cowan, earned a BFA from the School of the Art Institute of Chicago and an MFA from Indiana University. In addition to his career as a painter, he has worked in the studio of Jeff Koons and presently as a scenic artist for motion pictures. Both of these roles have increased Cowan's resolve for refined painting techniques, experimentation with process, and a keen eye for illusions. Cowan's work has been exhibited throughout the US, including 550 Gallery and the Painting Center, and his paintings reside in private and public collections, including the University of Scranton, Ann Arbor District Library in Michigan, and the Racquet Club of Chicago. And with that, I'm really excited to pass things over to Ben and to Lachlan.
Thanks, Lillian. Thanks everybody for joining us. And Lachlan, it's a real pleasure to get to talk to you here. Like a fellow Midwestern Landscape Painters Unite. That's kind of how I feel about this. So pretty excited for it.
Yeah, thank you, Lillian, for that introduction. And thanks, Ben, for taking part in this conversation with me. And yeah, I'm happy for this just to be a conversation more than a lecture or anything like that. And in terms of the format of this slideshow, I have pictures of the show, some detail images, and then also some tangential images of drawings and of things I'm thinking about. Right, I'll kind of hop right in. So a lot of my work begins as kind of observational drawing in one form or another. I like to take long walks. Like to take long runs. So drawing for me is kind of a frictionless way to take note of things I find visually interesting. And, it could be something like a head of cabbage, a tree, birds, things like that. And also on walks, taking photos of things that kind of pique my interest. And lately I've been taking photos of these dog signs, kind of collecting iconography that I find really interesting. And I think that these dog signs are, kind of funny, but they're also kind of serious in terms of thinking about how we divide up, urban spaces. So a lot of my drawing practice takes the form of this idea of like an icon being the thing. It could be a snow angel, or in other cases, taking a more kind of invented approach to an icon. So imagining a tree in this imaginary landscape, or things like birds or angel beings taking form. Right, and lately I've been thinking a lot about leaves, looking at leaves, making paintings of them, and thinking about the kind of symbolic and poetic potential of a falling leaf. This painting is a leaf with a moon in its eye.
Lachlan, what do leaves represent for you? Because I've been thinking a lot about leaves too, and like they're really fascinating things, both visually and like theoretically. I think like it so like in something like this, I see that leaf as a more like an abstract painting happening. but like other of your leaf paintings feel more like personified characters or things that could be like an individual of some kind or like lovers or something like that. How do you
Right. Yeah,
how-
that's a good question. I'm gonna just jump forward a couple of slides here
yeah,
because I think
those
of
are the
these
lovers.
two
Yeah.
leaves as being a little bit more like characters, like you're talking about. Because I've been thinking about this too. It's like two leaves falling. It's kind of like death. It's kind of like this moment between two stages, right? But it's
Mhm.
also, time for, rebirth and things like that. And I think that kind of intimacy or, ideas about like love come up a lot, in my work and with this kind of leaf iconography. And, in this one, I like that there's a kind of tension of, are the leaves going to grow closer together? Are they going to go further apart? It's kind of a sweetness that I like where, it's not necessarily happy, it's not necessarily sad. Um, but, it can carry a lot of, meaning for me.
Do you have a favorite leaf? Like,
I
these
don't,
are sort of like elm ash leaves or something like.
yeah, I really like oak leaves a lot.
Yeah, it's because they're the best.
Mhm.
But you
But
haven't. I don't think that you painted an oak leaf in this show.
I may not have, but I do a lot of drawings of them, and these are two leaves that I actually found while I was out on a run, and I made drawings of them, and then transferred that, yeah, to the painting. So a lot of my work I start as drawing in some way, as I mentioned, and sometimes in instances like this, drawing is kind of a fleshed out preparatory stage for a painting. This one I was kind of thinking about a landscape that was kind of chaotically coming to life. Um, but for the most part, all my work gets drawn in with colored pencil on the surface of canvas or wood, and then slowly applying layers of paint and color um, to that. Um, this painting, I was thinking about, walking along the river at night alone, singing, humming to yourself, and thinking about the landscape exalting along with you. And yeah, I love the texture of paint. I love the body of oil paint. I like to, sometimes leave that underdrawing visible. Other times build on it, pretty thickly. And I have a reference image that I just wanted to bring up related to this artwork, and it's by a Chicago-based artist, Margaret Wharton. I titled that painting after this one, which is called Valentine. Um, yeah, I think it's kind of beautiful artwork that's kind of been held close to my heart for some time. These chairs embodying a heart, sitting in a landscape. Margaret Wharton is a fantastic artist, but an artist that maybe hasn't quite gotten the um, credit that she's deserved.
Yeah, I hadn't heard of her really, and I don't think I'd seen the work until you had mentioned it in one of our previous conversations. And like looking up her chair sculptures, that it makes a
Mhm.
lot of sense to think of like how you're seeing her work and sort of reacting to it, where she's making something kind of whimsical and beautiful and very expressive out of out of an object that you just
Mhm.
recognize. But
Mhm.
you never don't see the chair in the work, but it becomes something totally different, kind
Mhm.
of wild and like fun, which is interesting.
And it's pretty, not to get too much into this, but it's amazing how she transforms the three-dimensional chair, and it can take so many different forms. This is kind of more of a sculptural installation based work of her, but I'm also really interested in how she's using kind of found objects and transforming them into flatter two-dimensional kind of icons of spider webs of all sorts of things. I also think about artists like, Miyoko Ito just had this big monograph come out. And I know a lot of artist friends of mine have, looked through it. And Margaret Wharton is an artist who I feel like deserves that level of attention. Um,
And I just saw that show at Matthew Marks of Miyoko Ito, and And like I love that you had pointed out that as an influence for your work, because I think the surface of your paintings do a really similar thing to hers, where there's this kind of improvised layering, but she never like covers up completely the thing underneath. And your work does that same thing. You're kind of like revealing the layers underneath, and allowing them to come through. And it's part of what gives your work this sort of shimmer and sparkle, and a sense of depth and luminosity that I really love. And like between your shapes, you can kind of see like a complementary color underneath, and it gives a vibration to the surface of the painting that it's like really wonderful.
Right.
Yeah.
And I've seen a little bit of her work in person. Yeah, it's pretty stunning how those layers of paint create, really deep colors, even when the colors are light. And in this painting, it's something that I was kind of trying to do to, create a very vibrant, vivid world that also felt rich and dark and meaningful and layered. Um, yeah, and I listened to a talk by John Dilg, who is a Iowa City-based painter, and he talked a lot about Miyoko Ito being an early influence. And I like making those connections between who are the artists I like, who do they like, and there's this lineage that I find very interesting. Lovebird, hand-carved frame elements I'm interested in.
Yeah.
That kind of working class, I like tramp art frames and that kind of do it yourself, keeping the hands busy. Yeah.
Hey, let me
Um,
sneak in one of my
yeah.
first official questions for you here. Talking about like the kind of working class craft object. Like so you in your bio, you were born in a really tiny town in Canada, and then you said you grew up in Wisconsin, right? In like a similarly small town. So
Right.
I'm just curious, like what was it like growing up in those places, and like what kind of interest did your parents have, and how did you discover art making?
Yeah, that's the town I grew up in, Wisconsin, like the town I was born in, had about 1,100 people, so it's very teeny tiny, rural Wisconsin. So not a lot of examples of artwork besides what might be at the public library. Um, Not a lot of examples of people who maybe you were, using art as a way of living, right? But I did spend a lot of time outside. I spent a lot of time, as a kid playing around in the woods, that kind of thing. And I think my initial introduction to art was, through comic books, magazines, doing a trip to the Twin Cities and looking at, museums there. Um, yeah, that kind of thing.
Like what kind of interest did your parents have? Like were your parents making crafts, or like
Yeah,
quilting, or like carpentry stuff at home, or anything like that?
yeah, yep. So my dad and my mom both are, artists in their own right. In a pretty broad term, my mom does a lot of crafting. She does a lot of sewing. And my dad builds a lot of things, so like sheds, houses, that kind of thing. So those interests definitely, early influences and intersect with the type of thing that I want to do with my own work as well.
Do you feel like you're actively trying to bring those things into the work, or is it more subconscious than that? Are you just sort of like, does it just sort of pop up in the studio out of compulsion?
I think I'm consciously trying to make work with, the tools and the materials that are around me. So, in the case of this frame, for example, pretty limited tool set I had when I was making it, pretty limited materials. I just was using scrap wood. I was using a knife and a chisel. I'm interested in what you can do with just a little of something.
Yeah, I like never get sick of looking at this painting. The way that the shapes interact within the painting and also within the frame is so beautiful. And there's this kind of seamless transition between the shapes of the bird wing to these kind of explosive, like the blue shapes in the background that like could be clouds or it could be like wind or like a lake waves or something like that, and then into the kind of ripples of the frame, and then into these like little heart peaks on each of those bumps on the frame. I love just like going back and forth between all those layers. What for you is the frame? I think framing for some people could be like purely decorative, or it could be a way to kind of integrate the frame into like an architectural space, or it could be this sort of transitional element, or it could be there to complement like elements within the painting. Do you have a particular kind of strategy for what you want the frames to do with your work?
Right. So for me, frame making can take a lot longer than the painting itself. I tried, in my mind, it's not necessarily a frame complementing a painting or a painting complementing the frame. I kind of made this painting and the frame with the intention of them going in tandem as one art object.
Mhm.
And in this case, as I was making the painting of the bird, I was, visualizing this peaked heart frame that would tie into this idea of a love bird. So maybe some desire to bring my artwork into the realm of objecthood and objectness.
Yeah, I think it really does that. And even like this frame, and there's one that's sort of just like you've got like an actual stick with some other kind of like smaller pieces of scrap wood put together. And there's the physicality of the frame, I think, complements and accentuates the physicality of the brush mark on the paint surface too in a really nice way.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like another instance of the artist hand being revealed in the final object that I really and it like gives it a sense of intimacy too.
Mm-hmm.
I think that all of those just make me love your paintings more and more.
Yeah. And I like making things that feel like they can be held or touched or, moved around with one's body. It's kind of the way I work when I'm making these paintings is they're all fairly small scale and I'm holding them up, painting them, pretty close to my body. So there's that kind of intimate touch as I'm making them. So I hope some of that is transferring over, to the viewer. Um, and when I was making this, I was having this idea of this kind of magical lovebird type of being that as it moved across the sky would kind of transform all the tonal qualities of the light. And thinking about how clouds can be characters or how we can see things in the sky, um, impossible kind of spaces. Um, Also thinking about how something like, I know many people don't like grackles and things like that, but how they can appear black, but actually are multicolored.
What did you have an experience growing up or as an adult in nature that was particularly profound that sticks with you? Um, I feel like this is a hard question. If somebody
Mhm.
asked me a question, I would have a really hard time narrowing it down to one thing. Um, but I feel like there's this sense of kind of magic and mystery and
Mhm.
um, transcendence in your painting that, to me, I think can only come from direct experience. And so that's why I'm asking this question: is like, what happened to you in nature that kind of connects you to these themes of like characters in the clouds, or the idea of like a bird flying through space and like changing the color of things.
Mhm. Um,
Um,
I'm not sure if there's one specific instance of that, but I do think I have, an ongoing relationship with, being outside, being, in the woods, thinking about memories of, laying in the grass, looking at clouds as a kid, that kind of thing. Um, I think there's a lot of those magical kind of moments in nature that happen, almost every time, I go for a walk, looking at the small, beautiful details of the world. Especially now it feels like, spring is bringing new life and right. So maybe not a specific instance. Although I do remember as a kid one time looking up at the clouds and seeing a cloud that was perfectly arrow shaped, pointing in the sky and yeah, I don't know, thinking back, I have a little bit of regret of being like, I wonder what would have happened had I followed that. That kind of thing.
Yeah, that's interesting. An arrow shape, like a like if you had followed it, was it pointing you towards something like
Yeah,
an
exactly.
yeah, that's interesting. I remember being a kid, I would sit on I lived in this sort of hilly neighborhood, and I would get on my bike, and in the summer the clouds would go by, and I remember trying to chase the cloud shadows down the street. Um, and I was always surprised how fast the clouds moved.
Hmm. Hmm.
Um, and so I don't know, there's something kind of amazing about nature and um, just trying to understand it. Um, but, so here's another question for you. You're talking about like looking at small things and um, kind of being fascinated by them. It occurred to me looking at your paintings that the point of view of you, the viewer looking at the painting, it's a little topsy turvy. Like you're always kind of like tipping the picture plane up, or like the horizon line becomes
Hmm.
this kind of flurry of activity and kind of dissipates, um, and like an object sort of like pressed up against the surface of the
Hmm.
painting. Like are you painting from any particular point of view? Is it like I kind of see the paintings are like painted by the point of view of a caterpillar or something,
Hmm. Yeah,
or like
that's
a bug in the air.
right. Yeah. So I think the subject of my painting is often, at the forefront or kind of plainly, introduced to the image. And then the ground or the area is beneath it. And uh, yeah, I'm kind of interested in creating those kind of impossible spaces which might feel just slightly um off, in some way.
Do you have a particular desire to like put the viewer at ease, or to like envelop the viewer, or like you may not even think of this as you're making work. I assume you're probably just lost in the process, but um like are you thinking about that?
Yeah, I think for me, I'm mostly interested in making these small paintings that feel like they could envelop you. So you feel like you could enter a space even though it's quite intimately sized. Um, yeah, I think a painting is successful for me when it feels very real, even if the elements um, are imagined.
So you recently moved from like Midwest, you did school in Iowa, and now you're near Seattle, you said, so like
Mhm.
Pacific West. um how that's a pretty stark change in landscape.
Mhm.
Like a totally different ecological zone, and
Mhm.
different animals. Like have you found that move to be influencing on your work and what you're looking at and responding to?
Yeah, I think that I've had kind of a back and forth relationship with the Western Washington and the Midwest. My family's been out here, so I've done trips and visited them. Um, so there definitely is a back and forth relationship in terms of the type of trees, the type of way it feels to be outside. Oops. So a couple of these paintings, this one, for instance, I started in Iowa, and I finished a few months later um, in Washington. This painting is kind of the same way, where it has bits of both worlds, making the painting across a fairly long span of time. The underpainting of this one um, is maybe 3 years old, and it was just sitting on my wall. Not quite sure what to do with it. And then, finishing out here in Washington. And that's also true for some of the framing elements of these paintings. So this top section of the frame I built probably 3 years ago, and then kind of waiting to see the right fit, for a painting. I like
Mhm.
that it match the directional movement of these trees and these kind of leaves moving in a processionary way across the landscape. Um, yeah, and I've been finding myself more and more drawn to taking my time very deliberately to slowly build a painting, or to feel like I can make it 90% of the way and then um, really take my time with the last 10% of what I'm making.
Yeah, I feel like that last 10% is always the hardest percentage of the painting. Um, for me personally, like I know I can like knock out a painting relatively quickly, but then the closer it gets to finish, the longer it takes. And it's not necessarily like painting time, it's like the the time it takes to sort of think of the right next move, or like what's the thing that's going to like really resolve everything. um did you have any particular strategies that you can share with us about how you accomplish that 90 to
Yeah.
100%?
Absolutely, Ben, and I know your work has a really precise level of finish and surface to it. So I could see that being a very particular last step. And I've been trying to just feel more comfortable not finishing something and just like leaving it on the wall, for a month or two and then dipping back into it, um, when it
Yeah.
feels right. I think that has made my work maybe a little more layered, maybe a little more heavily surfaced kind of thing.
Here, one thing I noticed in your compositions is that the edge of your painting really feels like a container in a way, like where forms and shapes kind of either meet the edge or they get close to the edge and then sort of swirl back in. And That's not necessarily like a constant, but as
Mhm.
there, there's some kind of philosophies of landscape painting are to like represent the expansive, explosive nature of the landscape. But then your paintings, I think, take a different philosophical approach of like kind of containing parts of the landscape and um but it's contained within the painting, but what it does is it gives it that sense of intimacy and closure and almost like a soft pillow. I just want to like put my face into your painting and just be loved by it. I don't do you have like how did you find um that way of working with the edge of your painting?
Yeah, I think I'm not trying to create this, expansive, this everything you see is everything that there is, kind of take on a landscape. I'm happy to show a kind of snapshot or, a feeling of being in a landscape. Yeah, I like that description of it being kind of pillowy or soft. And um, I think for my painting that comes through from my drawing practice, where I'm often drawing the edges of the drawing as kind of some kind of framing structure on it, and that often translates through into the painting.
Yeah, that makes sense. Are you a Morandi fan?
I am, yeah.
Okay.
Uh,
Like I feel like Morandi's kind of, he's a painter that does this all the time. He's, the objects sort of
yeah.
sit in the middle and kind of reinforce their own enclosure. Um, and it makes them feel like an isolated world of their own, which your paintings kind of do that same thing where it's like I don't look at your painting and think, oh yeah, Iowa. They feel very much like an interior landscape it's like about your experience with the landscape, not about, you know,
Yeah,
biology. Like,
totally. And maybe just a bit of background to how some of these passages or the construction of some of these paintings came to be. Several years ago, I did a show while I was a grad student at the University of Iowa. titled Paintings and Drawings from Ghostland. And my intention was to create a body of drawings and paintings which were of this imaginary place where there were trees and angels and um, different types of imagined characters. And there would be traces of people in those spaces, but the people themselves wouldn't be there. So in some ways this is maybe an extension, this work, on some of those ideas.
That makes a lot of sense because they do feel like they contain a certain presence of otherworldly being. They're sort of mystical and spiritual, and like definitely have that like Charles Birchfield explosive energy of sort of like painting what's beyond the scene.
Yeah, and I love that idea of, going out, making a drawing, bringing that back to the studio, and not having a one-to-one relationship with observation or that kind of observational drawing practice, but really building in your kind of internal vision into the work. Yeah, I love Charles Birchfield, and I love reading his writing as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you're making a drawing sort of from observation, memory, bringing it back. What kind of what do you think is influencing your choices of color? Because I really find your color beautiful and intriguing because it doesn't quite have that observed color. It's like feels a little bit like nighttime color, but various kinds of light sources happening. What do you do to choose those color worlds for your paintings?
Right. I think that my paintings go through, maybe several different kind of color identities as they're being built up. Um, I work with a fairly limited palette in terms of the, types of colors that I'm painting with. I find that I enjoy that limitation. Making something feel, like it's at night or in a kind of um, place where light is not quite realistic has been an important part of my practice for um, a while. And for me, I think color is really a lot of play and a lot of experimentation. Um, and yeah, as I'm working on the painting, the color's always changing and morphing until it feels kind of like everything is fitting together right, like putting in the last pieces of a puzzle. Um, so kind of more maybe intuitive understanding of color.
Yeah. Like for me, this painting is like the color is so surprising because your darkest colors are in the sky and then the lightest colors are on the objects, which is sort of the opposite of how I see the world. But that's part of what makes it feel like a psychological space or sort of mystical. Um, but the color feels so right for the painting. Um, I love that. What the like? So you have these reoccurring figures, or like in one piece you were calling them like angels and sort of spirits, and but then around that light tree, I kind of see a similar thing too. But to me, I read those as like kind of grassy, bushy patches. Um, where are you finding those shapes, and are they just kind of occurring as you're painting? And
Yeah, and occurring as I'm painting and also occurring as I'm kind of sketching out the work and how that drawing translates to a painting is, going to change some of that um, yeah, appearance of the characters. I think I was thinking of these as different kind of patches of textured grass. And to speak to the, ground portion of this image, I was imagining a kind of quilt world where the surface of the ground was very patchy and built out of these different blocks of color.
yeah, yeah, I love that. But most of these paintings kind of feel like fall, winter time, where they but then you're painting them over a course of years sometimes. So like what's your relationship to that, to the seasons and making paintings?
Yeah, so I think a lot of my work does change based on the season, and while some of these were constructed over the course of years, the actual the layering process maybe happened over years, and the finishing process happened much quicker than that. But most of these were painted in fall, from leaves I found on the ground, that kind of thing. Um, and I think, yeah, I feel, as an artist, I like to make work that, responds to the changing of the seasons, the changing of, the qualities of, being out there in the world.
This yellow leaf painting is one of my favorites. I think it's the favorite from the show. I really love this painting so much.
And I wanted to make something that felt very tender. It felt very simple, where there'd be these kind of leaflet hearts surrounding a leaf, falling, from the sky, and playing again with that kind of collage-y, quilt-like elements of color happening through it. This is another one of those paintings that, I painted this over the surface of another painting, as I know a lot of artists do.
Kind of one thing I love and I'm kind of curious about with your paintings, like the work that's sort of pre this show, to me always felt like a little more abstract. And then with this, you have these kind of recognizable images, but still the paintings can sort of break down into a more abstract world. And you've made references to like quilting and things like that. But how do you think about the straddling representation and abstraction, and like what sort of choices are you making to either arrive at a more representational image or one that's more abstract?
Yeah, so this painting is actually painted on top of one of those images you might be thinking about previous to this show. It was a kind of abstracted butterfly that had a lot of different eyes on it.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not super concerned with the differentiation between something being very naturalistic or something being abstract, but I am interested in, kind of positioning my work somewhere in a place where, I can do both things. I think as an artist, I want to be someone who is, able to work in whatever way suits the needs of what I'm trying to make. And in this show, I was, yeah, really wanting to make a body of work that returned to more recognizable subject matter, right? Simple things, and while maintaining some of that abstract simplification of form.
Cool.
Ben,
Love it.
is this a good time to pivot to questions from the audience?
Yeah, definitely.
Okay, awesome. Yeah, Lachlan, why don't you stop screen sharing so we can have a little more face-to-face? Perfect. Thank you so much. I really loved that, and you touched on some really amazing topics. I have one question of my own, which I thought I would ask before reading a few of these great questions from the audience. Lachlan, your show is titled Life Happens Everywhere, and I know that choosing a title, especially to represent an entire body of work, can be really challenging. And what does that title mean to you, and how did you land on that for this show?
Yeah, I was thinking about being kind of in a transitionary state of life. My partner and I aren't completely sure where we want to move to. And thought of the title thinking back to those moments being outside, and it's springtime and it kind of feels like life is blossoming everywhere right now. Um, and yeah, just thinking of that kind of simple fundamental idea that, wherever you are, there's, life kind of exploding from the world, and in the show trying to capture a small piece of that.
Right. Thank you so much. All right, I'm going to start reading some of these questions that have come in from audience members. One of them is, do you have any advice for emerging artists?
Oh, that's a great question. I think my advice is just to make a lot of work and to spend a lot of time drawing. Um, even myself more and more, I feel like I'm going through periods where I'm spending, maybe a month or two just drawing. And for me, I found that to be a very frictionless, seamless way of, working through different ideas, different kind of compositions, which translate a lot to, um, yeah, making artwork in other forms, sculpture, painting, ceramic work. And I think other advice, I love being friends with other artists, and I like talking to other artists about their artwork. This is kind of fun for me because I haven't talked about, my own paintings with people in a little bit. So it's that kind of thing is good. Just the being friends with people that are making work you like.
I feel like in forming a community of artist peers, like you're talking about, is so important, and getting that support and feedback from, artists you admire and can just
Mhm.
talk to, it goes such a long way.
Yeah, and that's a great point where, there's all these artists that I admire, out in the world more than I could name. And a lot of these people you can just email and talk to, you could Zoom with them and they're happy to do it. And, I love that the art world feels very, open and sharing and can be very loving sometimes.
That's how I found you. Okay, Anne asks, what landscape painters are your favorites?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, I love John Dilg's work, from, Iowa City Painter. I love Charles Birchfield. Randy has some really great landscapes, just to name a few.
Thank you. This one is from Brooks, and he asks, I'm curious to hear more about Margaret Wharton's influence on your work. The way she uses chairs as a malleable unit for construction seems to be similar to the way you use leaves, clouds, or trees. Could you talk about how these units evolve and show up from painting to painting?
Yeah, so Margaret Wharton's practice for I've read, I'm not an expert on her work, but I've done the best kind of research I could on her as an artist. And a lot of her practice for 15 years was just based on this idea of taking found chairs around Chicago, using a bandsaw, cutting them apart, and using that almost as a collage-like process from which to build these other kind of um, flattened or three-dimensional structures. So I think I like to try to do the same thing with some of the kind of characters that I'm building into my paintings, where keeping a sketchbook with these different leaves, trees, and recollaging them, reformatting them to create different kinds of loose narratives, depending on how they're all structured together. Um, yeah, I wish I had now included more images of Margaret Wharton's work. And again, I encourage everyone to take a deep dive. Did I answer all parts of Brooks's question there?
Let me see, I think so, but let's see. The meat of the question was, could you talk about how these units evolve and show up from painting to painting? Mhm.
Yeah, definitely. And I think about my own practice as being one where I'm kind of listening to the paintings I made before. So there are changes and iterations and kind of ripples throughout the artwork.
I was not familiar with Margaret Wharton's work, but I'm really glad that you put her on my radar because she's someone I definitely want to explore more.
Mhm.
This one is from Elise, and she asks, I really enjoyed the way you said, quote, drawing is a frictionless way to take notes. And I definitely feel the same way, but could you articulate what it is about drawing that makes it so frictionless?
Yeah, I think for example, if I'm going on a run, that's often a time where I'll kind of compose a drawing in my head. And then, when I get back home, I can just take a Sharpie, draw it on a piece of paper. You know, you don't need a studio. You don't really even need tools besides a piece of paper. Or, you know, if you're someone like James Castle, maybe you're just taking a little bit of spit and a little bit of soot and creating a drawing out of that. So there's really not much you need, right? You know, even in painting, you kind of have to have, you know, at a minimum, a palette, a table, somewhere to work. But you know, drawing is something that, you know, you can take with you. You can, yeah, just kind of limitless in its potential or its intimate capacity. And yeah, it's very uh, kind of freeing just to feel like you know, you can create a world from a piece of paper.
Mm, that makes a lot of sense. This one is from Liffy, and she asks, how did school influence you as an artist? Did you have any inspiring teachers or experiences that really moved you in one direction or another?
Yeah, I had great experiences at school. You know, I was kind of lucky to have as an undergrad a pretty interdisciplinary art education. Great art teachers, Ruth Ann Godelli and Chris Wilcox were two people I really liked and whose work I responded to, you know, as a young student. And then um, yeah, and I think moving through grad school, I was really lucky to have a strong group of peers and friends, and you know, a bunch of people I still talk to, and you know, having those kind of daily conversations about artwork and you know, ideas about teaching and stuff like that is, yeah, you know, back to that, you know, just enjoyment of being around people who you know like and respect.
Mhm.
I was lucky to have that in school.
Amazing. Yeah, I'm really interested that you have this strong foundation in geography. And because your paintings are so grounded in place, do you think your, studies of geography as an undergrad, um, you know, propelled your themes of painting? Do you think they
Yeah.
went hand in hand?
Yeah, maybe in a kind of loose way. I
Mm.
think, you know, maybe 7 years ago was more direct,
Mhm.
and I'm taking, you know, maybe more an intuitive approach, but those same ideas are popping up in my work. I recently spent, you know, about a month in Tennessee, and I really found myself studying how there's all these plots of land out there that are kind of you know, just grass and then surrounded by trees kind of as this decorative protective unit. So um, maybe my study of geography, you know, impacted how I think about the use of space.
Mhm. And then, sort of on the flip side of being a student, you also have extensively taught. You're an educator, and you have taught many courses on art appreciation, which I love. And I think that should be a course everywhere. But did teaching or has teaching influenced the way you paint or the way you think about painting?
Yeah, I mean, I think as a teacher, I'm always, you know, learning as well. I'm always digging into new artists, new people who I've never heard of that, you know, um, that are great. And, you know, Margaret Wharton is one of those artists that I share with my students a lot of because, you know, maybe they haven't heard of her, but her work is really powerful and strong, you know, and very meaningful. So I think as a teacher, you know, art appreciation is a class I love to teach because, uh, you know, students are introduced to, you know, there's the stuff they're used to in the textbook, but then you can also kind of be a canon builder and show them all this stuff that isn't in there. And that's
Mhm.
really fun and great to see what my students respond to.
Sure.
Um,
And speaking of, you know, art history and the artists who are in the textbooks, um, who are some of the, I know you've mentioned a few painters like John Dill, but with your work in particular, I hear a lot of people likening your work to Hilma af Klint or other transcendentalists. And is she someone whose work you look at, or other people from that sort of vein of painting?
yeah, I'm really I'm a great lover of all the transcendentalist movements, you know, Hilma af Klint. I also really like Agnes Pelton. My friend Claire introduced me to her work while I was a student, and um, yeah, I love the idea of, you know, taking a kind of real experience and transforming it. Um, looking deeply into oneself and seeing what comes out.
I love that. A teacher in college told me that all landscapes are self-portraits. And I really feel that with you in particular, and just, looking inward, and your paintings are figureless, but they really are human. Okay, we are nearing the end, but I guess just on one final note, sort of looking forward, do you have any projects on your horizon, or do you even work in projects? Do you, conceive of a body of work? Sort of, does it have parameters, or what's next for you?
I think currently I've been working on, these series of, small format drawings. And I showed a couple of them in this slideshow, but that's something that I'm gonna continue doing. I think it feels like what's right for me at this time.
Amazing. I can't wait to see more. Thank you, Ben, and thank you, Lachlan, so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.